All right, so I'm here today to talk about the 3 types of fun. Does anybody in here know the 3 types of fun? Awesome. Okay. So the first type of fun is what we always call fun. It's an activity you're doing and you're having a good time when you're doing it, right? It's going for a nice walk in the woods, a mellow bike ride along a path, floating on the river with your best friends in an inner tube. It's what we all call fun. When we talk about going into the wild, the crazy, the stuff that happens when we're out in the woods or wherever we find ourselves, there are more types. I find myself living in type 2. The second type of fun is fun that is terrible when it's happening. You're miserable. You're hot or you're cold. You're usually sweating either way. You're tired. You're probably scared. You might think you're going to fall off something. It's fun that is awful and miserable when you're doing it, but then afterwards, in retrospect, that actually was kind of fun. It was kind of cool. It's something you'll go back and you talk about with your friends, okay? The drinks you have during or after type 1 fun, white wine, maybe a light lager, something with an umbrella in it. Type 2 fun drinks are more like the beers in the parking lot afterwards. You're like, I can't believe we just did that, but that was pretty neat. Type 3 fun is a bit different story. Type 3 fun is not fun at all when you're doing it, and not fun afterwards. So think like Ernest Shackleton. Think Aaron Ralston, that guy who had to saw his arm off with a Swiss Army knife. For me, the thing about going into the wild is that there's always a spectrum. Even something that starts out as type 1 fun often runs into type 2, which is kind of what I like, and might even go into type 3. So side note, the difference between a trip and an adventure. A trip is type 1 fun. A trip is when everything goes as planned and you have a blast. When something goes a little bit sideways, now it's an adventure, and now we're in type 2. So my father was the one who introduced me to going into the wilderness, going in the wild. Back starting when I was in 6th grade, when he took me up to Mount Marcy, the highest point in the Adirondacks, sort of a family tradition. And growing up all through high school, he was my scoutmaster. So as I was learning about going into the wild, he was there guiding me. For whatever reason, I kind of got away from that in my 20s. It was about 10 years ago when I was visiting my parents when they lived in Tucson, Arizona, where they started to become snowbirds. And we went hiking, and I went with my parents along this trail in the desert at the base of this huge mountain called Elephant Head. It rises about 2,000 feet, this huge rock that goes straight up. And as it turns out, there's also a way to hike around it. You can kind of crawl up it and climb up it. And a few years later, after I had sort of sparked my love for the outdoors again, I went back there with my dad, and we climbed Elephant Head. About 4 years ago, I found myself back in Tucson. It's sort of become kind of an annual pilgrimage in the spring when our beautiful winters here are just getting so overwhelmingly great that I just have to go down to the desert. Then I found myself back there, and I was there with my brother-in-law, and it was our last day there, and we decided, let's go to Elephant Head again with my father. It's kind of a cool hike. It starts out, you're walking along this old mining road along the side of a mountain, and then you come around a corner and you see the big peak that you're eventually going to climb. And then you have to hike down about 500 feet straight down into a canyon. There's a little spring there, and then you have to hike straight back up the other side to a saddle. And after that, then you climb the peak. So all was well and good. We had done this before. We start to hike down, stop at the creek, get some water, start to climb up. And about halfway up, I notice as we're going up the switchbacks that my dad's having a tougher time. About every switchback, we have to stop for 30 seconds or a minute or so we can catch his breath. And I'm not sure what's going on because he's involved in a hiking group out there. He's out in the mountains here all the time. It's something we've done before. At that point, we're moving into type 2 fun. Okay, it's hot, the sun's being down on us, and now I start to think about what's plan B, what's plan C. We can turn around and go back, but then we have to go back down the same thing and back up. What if we just went up a little bit farther and see if he does a little bit better? So we did that, and he stayed underneath the rock in the shade while my brother-in-law and I scrambled up about 700 feet of rocks. So think about boys crawling on rocks. All right, we're back in type 1 fun. Okay? We get up to the top, and we're looking all around, and then we drop back down. And he's feeling better, but at this point, we can't really go, he doesn't feel good enough to go down and then back up again. So we decide we're gonna go across the side of the mountain. There's a trail that goes that way that I looked up, it looked like it went around the contours a little bit, and we'd be fine. We're crawling up on rocks again. Type 1 fun. Then the trail disappears. Type 2 fun. Next thing I know, now we're actually bushwhacking. So we're on the side of a hillside with a bunch of sand and gravel that's like walking across a zillion little marbles. And on top of all that is a million plants that want to stab you. And it gets much harder going, and I'm not really doing any better for him at all, and I don't really know what's going on with him. And there was a point where we realized that we actually can't go straight up this wash where we want to go to get back to the trail. It's actually curving back in the whole way. So I crawled up on a cliff to try to get a better view where I could see, maybe guide them along and find a better path down. As I'm doing that, I look out over down the canyon and I can see the interstate. It's only about 6 miles away. Couldn't really be much farther. And as I'm walking along, I'm watching my brother-in-law helping my father along this. And I don't know what's happening with him. I don't know if he's having a heart attack or what's going on. And at that moment, I sat there and realized civilization's right there, but it couldn't be farther away. And it might have just killed my father. But that's not the kind of thinking that will really get you out of the situation. So I had to kind of stuff that down, and as I did that, I looked down and realized there's a way to get down out of the canyon and climb up some rock in the empty, dry wash to get us out of it. We eventually did. And we walked out, and we called my mom on the phone and said, yeah, we're fine. And as it turns out, she was about 15 minutes away from calling the sheriff and sending a helicopter up. My father turned out to be okay. He just hadn't really been hiking that much that season, as much as I thought he was. But that ran the whole gamut of all that. And it made me think, though, that we all like to think about fun as type 1 fun. But those things kind of fade into the background. It's the type 2 and the type 3, even though we don't want the type 3, that actually brings us all here in something like this, because that's where our stories come from. Is those experiences that aren't great at the time, but they become something that are a lesson to us afterwards. And so that's why I go into the wild. Thanks.